My name is Vijay Doshi. I'm a product manager at Tableau. I work on a team that works on all the data connectivity, the extensibility, sort of getting all the data in and preparing it, data engine, query engine, all that sort of stuff. At Tableau, every month or so we have a hackathon. And about a year ago, the hackathon came around that was something called the JavaScript Data Connector. And a couple of guys, Daniel Leventhal and Angel Diaz, were responsible for starting that. I don't know if they're in the room yet, but if you see them in the hall, give them a hug. The outcome of that hackathon, of course, was a Web Data Connector, and it's amazing to see already, in just a very short period of time, all of the creativity that's unleashed. A great leader in this space so far has been Craig Bloodworth, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce him and give him a chance to show us how easy it is to create web data connectors. Greg?
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So, I sort of want to start this presentation with a story. And I think it's something that we can all share in terms of how we came about and ended up in this room today and discovered Tableau. And it's really something that I think is common through a lot of people, and it's sort of this need to learn and understand the world around us. We choose to do that through data. And at one point, I'm sure you can remember, you received that report, whether it was PDF or Excel, and something snapped, right? And then you went out to market. You thought there must be something better, something that can do this where it interests me, and I might get some excitement out of it. I might actually understand something. And you found Tableau, and now you find yourself here today. But that data probably told you something. And for us as a company back in the UK, it told us that while we had a great customer base, we didn't really understand how we were working with them once they'd become a customer, once they bought a license. And so we decided to improve our support system. And we did the same thing we'd done with Tableau. We went out to market and looked. We started with like Zendesk. Right now, we've ended up with a tool called Freshdesk, which is a cloud-based system. And it had a really great end-user experience. People submit tickets, and we get all the information we needed. We control them really nicely. And then 2 months into it, we hit the reporting tab. And we get, 10, 12 numbers that sort of tell us nothing. I doubt even the guys at the front can probably see the arrows next to the numbers to say whether they're good or bad. There's this line that tells us where stuff comes from, and then donuts, which I only like to eat, I don't like to look at. And it felt like we'd sort of gone back in time, right? This was what we tried to get away from in discovering Tableau, and we found ourselves here. And it's something I think people get trapped in a lot with web-based systems. The data is up in the cloud. It's in this, you just access it through this website. You don't know where it lives. You don't know how to get access to it. I'll say that. These systems usually always have a get-out-of-jail-free card. Oops, don't go backwards. Export. Export to CSV, or in this case, export to XML. Support desk is quite tricky. It's difficult. It's got lots of nested things, lots of activity in there. And what these buttons inevitably mean is more work. More work that you've got to go through to process and transform that data, get it usable. And you go through all that, you do it, you get something in Tableau, you think that's great, and then you realize, wait a minute, tomorrow I've got to go back and hit that button again, and then again, and then again, and we're back to square one. So this is where I fell in love with the Web Data Connector. It gives me the ability to access these systems in a way that is reusable, it's reliable, hopefully. There's a demo later, we'll see. But really, it just makes all these systems easy to go to and to get and to work with, because I'm confident that I can always get the data out, and so I can once again learn and understand my company and the world around us. Now, this is a session about coding, all right? But before you all sort of start looking at your phones and thinking, oh, I better sneak out because there's another one down the hall that might be a bit more interesting, it's going to be quite light, all right? We're going to go through the idea around the JavaScript API, the Web Data Connector API, how it works, and actually take some look at some code. And I would like to try and demystify how complex coding is, or how, this is a connector. This is something that's surely quite complex and difficult to learn and understand. And it really isn't. And to sort of give you some perspective, I'm assuming this is your ability in JavaScript and in coding. Okay? And this is where I'd like to get you to. Now, there are resources out there. Okay, if this is the first time you've thought about creating a connector, this is your day one, your day zero. All right, you're going to want to know where to go later on. And first thing you want to do when you get out of here is get on the Tableau development portal. Tableau have made it so easy to create even the most basic connection and get some data out with resources such as the SDK that powers the whole thing, that takes so much complexity out of what should be a really complex problem. Some great development documentation, and most importantly, everyone who uses Tableau knows how important seeing other people's workbooks and understanding how they've done it and how to recreate it yourself. Some great examples and tutorials to go through. And at the end, we're going to go through how you might deconstruct one and make it your own, and just make a little change so you can sort of get your journey on the way. Now, the best resource in the world, and probably my guidebook, right? I'm not a coder. I did like 1 year of computer science at university, and then left because it wasn't sort of engaging enough. And so I've kind of picked up bits of code and I do stuff, but I consider myself a Google developer. Right? The first place I go to is to search and just say, you know what, I'd like to do something. And just like the great community that we love for Tableau, of course, there's an even bigger community for developing. And you can do this. You can go on, you can get the information you need, and you can just try it out and test it. All right? Don't think that, like, wait a minute, I probably shouldn't do Google because my boss might see, and he might think I'm kind of don't know what I'm doing. So just do it. Okay? There's loads of stuff out there to help you. But we are going to go through some stuff to get going. This is kind of what we're going to cover. All right? Really simple. We're going to go through what I've called kind of a JavaScript 101. So I want to give you a placeholder, right? Coding, developing is this big beast. There's loads of stuff. Books are 600 pages long. What are the key areas you need to know or just need to remember in order to do this stuff in the most basic level? We're going to look at a code for Web Data Connector, and so you can then go back with your laptop and have a look and understand why it's doing what it's doing, where stuff happens, and so you can start building yourself. In that, we will also get our hands dirty and make a change to one of the existing connectors, so you can just see how easy it is to do. And then at the end, we might have a bit of time for a bit more of a demo, and then we field a few questions. So, as a show of hands, who's ever actually clicked, ever since 9.01 was released, who's clicked the Web Data Connector button? That's pretty good. 50% or so. Okay, so you can go on Twitter, whatever you want to do. Actually, no, don't go on Twitter because you'll break the Wi-Fi. For the other half, let's just have a look at what we're talking about. So, this is a Mac. It's a little bit more cut down in terms of the connectors, but at the very bottom of the list, you'll find the Web Data Connector. And it doesn't sort of address exactly what you're going to connect to. All it does is just bring up a box that says, like, put a URL in here. And of course, the JavaScript is very much sort of web-based, and so the data connectors are all based around navigating to a website, essentially, that has some code in it to allow us to pull data. And now as we pray to the internet gods, we're going to go to one of the early ones I created, which is one to download my Fitbit data. I wear a tracker every day. I've got about 2 years of history, I think. And so I can open this up, and this is something you can do as well if you happen to have Fitbit. And it's going to ask you to log in. I see, now this is where the demonstration is always going to fail. We're going to do that one more time. I always hate testing my luck. I thought I got it on stage. I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. Make sure it works, make sure the internet holds up. And now I've used up all of my luck. So let's go for it again. Triggering. There we go. I'm going to pick that one up with you later, by the way. For the dev guys. There's a little bug on my laptop. I don't know why, but it works eventually. So it's just like connecting to any other data source then. Tableau goes off, and it comes up with this sort of loading, executing query, and then it returns dimensions and measures. Now, obviously, depending on how the person's coded it, it's going to return a set of dimensions, which in terms of Fitbit is basically the day that I did my activity. And then a bunch of measures, which are the things that the Fitbit records, such as steps and distance and such. And so why don't we just sort of have a quick look at what the impact of this conference has been on my step count. If I can get my mouse up there. Whoa. I think my busiest day in the whole year. I think when I looked, I'd covered like a half marathon or something, just trying to get between sessions and generally walk around. It's my excuse for being tired. It could be the beer. But so that's it. That is what a web data connector is. It allows us to use something that someone else has created, just like you would any other connection, a connection to SQL or Oracle or something, and pull in the data from something that's hopefully meaningful to you. You know, whether it's a Strava, whether it's something you're interested in, financial data that you've gone to through Quandle or something. Okay. Now, what you could do is, of course, sit back and just wait for someone to create all the connectors in the world. But you've probably got a system that you're quite interested in. Now, and, you know, the Tableau folks, we like to do things, right? We don't just sit back and sort of submit a ticket to IT and say, hey, can you create that report for me? We do it. So why should the Web Data Connector be any different? And to get you on that route, let's look at some JavaScript and go through this 101, so you know what to look for when you leave this room. And there is a health warning. Obviously, we're going to look at code. But if you can stick with me, if you can keep your eyes open, keep awake, there'll be an odd reward sort of sprinkled into the presentation. So let's get through together. And the 8 areas we're going to be covering are basically just sort of generic. What would you be looking at in terms of a web data connector? It is essentially a little website. Okay, so we've got HTML, something called CSS, and JavaScript. Within JavaScript, we've got variables and objects. We've got something called jQuery, event listeners, arrays, and Ajax, and so on. Okay, so I believe with sort of only just kind of knowing these 8 points, you can get started. So we're going to go through these quite quickly. You can look up stuff in books, and I'm going to recommend one as well towards the end. So when we talk about websites, when we talk about the Web Data Connector, we usually talk about 3 areas. The first one is HTML. HTML is the building blocks to the page that we look at. All right? It's where stuff is placed and just generally what the content is. CSS is a way to style it, what colors are going to be, how big the font's going to be. And then JavaScript is kind of all the code, which is the engine. All right? So it does the grunt work, and it does all the sort of processing in the background. Within JavaScript, we have things called variables, objects, and functions. And a variable isn't too crazy. It's just sort of, you could think of it as a parameter within Tableau. Okay, so it's a named value. In this example of this picture, we could say the temperature is about 110. The sky in Vegas is clearly cloudy. You know, I'd say that's a beautiful day come from the UK, but hey. And, you know, it's about 1:50, is it? No, a little early. On the 21st. Okay, so that could be the date time. We can then have objects, and objects are a variable which have properties. Okay, so we don't describe one thing in a string or in a value. We describe lots of things. So we could say that this casino has a value of gaming space. All right, and according to Wikipedia, that's about 171,000 square feet. And according to Ocean's 11, the money in the casino on a fight night is $150 million with inflation. I'm not sure what that is, but you get the idea. We can also see in the picture there's cars, and you can say the car color is red, it has 4 wheels, and it's top speed or something like that. And then we have functions, and these are kind of the things that do the work. So in the case of a casino, of course, you can gamble. And in gambling, you might give someone money. Okay, so you can have an input to the function, which would be the money that you're going to hand over to me. And being a very nice person, I'm going to trigger an alert back to you that says, please don't gamble, and I'm going to return that money to you. All right, that would be our gamble function. We then can create all these functions, but we need to interact with the interface somehow. Okay, and we can do this through 2 methods. One is called HTML DOM, and the other one's called jQuery. HTML DOM is a native set of functions to JavaScript. jQuery is this additional library that you can call on and you can download for free. Really, the difference between the two is jQuery is a bit quicker to write, and some people find it a bit more intuitive. Personally, I like DOM. I'm sort of a bit OCD. I like to type lots of stuff out and be very specific about what I do. But in the case of this picture here, we could tag the HTML code at the bottom, which says image source with a file name, ID cat. And we can then reference that using DOM and jQuery by just getting the element ID, which is cat. What we could do is, because you are a cat lover, you're a dog lover, you can change that image. Say you hover over it and you flash up a picture of your dog. You can do that with something called an event listener. All right, so the probably most common one is something like a click. All right, so you present a button to someone, and they click on it. You want then the web data connector to trigger and run. In order to capture that, you set an event listener, and it just sits there and waits for the event to happen. And the various events can be things like what here, such as load, input, click, submit, focus, or change. All right, so if someone submits a form, you can then trigger a whole bunch of JavaScript to run. One of the more important things to know about within JavaScript in terms of the web data connector is something called an array. And you can think of an array as a shopping list. All right, it's a list of values all within one variable. And in the example I've got here, it's bread, milk, eggs. So if I wanted to describe the array shopping list, it would be all a list of these values. And one of the great things about it is we can save values to it, and then you can pull values out, and we can iterate through all of the list as well. The reason it's important is because it's how we define the column names within a data connector and also the column types. How we get the data is usually by a function called AJAX. And AJAX is a way to just connect to an external web service and then do something with the results that are returned. All right, now you will be familiar with AJAX in terms of you've used it, but you haven't known it's been going. So for instance, whenever you go on Google and you start typing in, how do I do JavaScript? As you're typing, Google is firing loads of AJAX calls to get those top 5 search lists. All right? And in the data connector, it's usually on the sort of go get data button. When the data comes down, hopefully it's in something called JSON. All right, which now Tableau people won't sort of be so familiar with. It used to be XML, now it tends to be more JSON. Hopefully it is, because it's basically made for JavaScript. It's so easy to navigate and to work with. So in the example sort of got here, you have a bunch of name-value pairs. The second one there, the name is number, and the number has a value 1, 2, 3. And we can navigate through it just by simply using a dot in between each of the levels of the tree. So we can get all the way down to, say, property A by just saying data.object.property A, and it would return the value to us. Finally, we're going to get a lot of data down. We're going to get a lot of records, and we need to be able to loop through those. And you can just use a for loop to navigate through an array of data and basically just iterate over and over and over and over again, running the code, building up the data connector until it's finished, and then you can present it back to Tableau. And within that, there's probably some logic that you've got to do, and this is all familiar to anyone who's used a calculator field, right? It's an if statement. All right, nothing too crazy there. So that was the whirlwind tour. You've done very well. You should pat yourselves on the back and enjoy a hamster eating cake off a casino chip. So I promised resources, and here we go. The best book that I've seen on this subject so far is the one a colleague down here recommended. It's called JavaScript and jQuery by John Duckett. Of course, lots of stuff online. I'm sure some will be familiar with W3 Schools, really sort of just nice, clean examples of how to use different areas of code. And then Stack Overflow for sort of the developer community, which is just huge and massive, and loads of people helping each other out. There is, of course, the Tableau community forum. All right, so you're building stuff for Tableau. There's probably a few things in there. You want to make sure that you're doing right and know that people understand the Tableau problem. So use the forums. The samples, as I mentioned earlier, just get a look at understanding how something that works, understand it fully, make some changes, and then go off and do your own thing. And yeah, as part of that, look at other people's code. And I'm on stage, so I get to throw out a sort of reference to a blog post that I wrote about 5 things you should know about the Web Data Connector. Okay? So let's break it down. Let's actually get in and see what the code looks like. When we open it up, we're going to see that there are sort of 4 main areas. The first one is the user interface. And that's kind of obvious, right? When I connected to Fitbit, I got presented with a button that said, let's go. It sent me off to do some authentication, and then it went off and did a bunch of work. You might be presented with some sort of config screen, or maybe it does the config in the background, as the example we're going to be looking at. Once all that's done and it's ready to go, we'll then declare the column names to Tableau and the data types. And then we'll actually go off and get the data and build up the table that is going to form our data source. Now, that's the logical. That's how I think about it, right? So interface, something goes in the background, it builds the table. When it comes to the code, it's kind of in reverse. So at the top, we declare the column names and data types. We declare the bit about how to build the data table. Then we do the bit of the config bit in the code. And then right at the bottom is the interface. So the first thing you're going to do when you're opening up a sample is scrolling all the way down and looking at what's in the bottom, and then working your way back up. And there's a reason for that. It's when a browser or the data connector actually executes the code, it needs to compile all of the stuff beforehand and then present the interface to you. All right, so it compiles in the order that's programmed. So you want to make sure that all that stuff's at the top, and then the last thing that's presented is the user interface. All right, let's take a look at some code. There we go. The first time I presented with PowerPoint in like 2 years, I still hate it. Okay, there we go. Hopefully you can see that at the back. I did a bit of a trial, and so we blew the text up a bit. All right, so this is delivered in the examples pack from the Data Connector developer area on the website, and it's the stock quote connector, all right, the final version. So let's go and break it all down, and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom and look at the interface. So the interface is really simple. It has, within HTML, body tags. some words, some sentences that say enter a ticker symbol. We then get an input field that allows us to enter that ticker symbol for the stock data we're going to download. And then we have a button that says get stock data. Okay? So let's have a look in the top right here. So this is within a simulator that's also given out with the SDK that you download. Here is the data connector as we look at it within Tableau Desktop. We then also have a bit sort of the config, but it's kind of really more of the interface, expression that describes, right, when everything's loaded, what should we do? All right, and it's a bit of jQuery that says, well, when the document's ready, assign a click function. So remember that listener that we talked about earlier? So when someone clicks on the submit button, get the input ticker symbol and assign it to the variable ticker symbol. And if someone actually has inputted something, they're not just trying to sort of fool around, we then submit it to Tableau. The next stage is that config. And so the config includes things like there's a few variables within a web data connector. One is called connection data. And this is a way to pass variables from your interface into the get data section of the code. All right, so obviously the most important one here is the symbol that the person's entered. And it's important to know that when this code is executed, Tableau goes off and takes whatever's in this bit and execute it first within that get data call. Okay? So it's not necessarily going, if you assign variables down here within the interface, they are not going to get passed up into the get data call. All right? You have to use the connection data in order to store them and then pass them up. And then you can also give the connection a name, right? So call it stock quote. There's some config that goes on in terms of building. Let's see if I can keep scrolling. There we go. I'll try and keep this scrolling to a minimum, but there's a function which is building the URL. So all we gave the connector was the value of the stock quote, the stock we wanted to get down. And what it has to do is build up a URL to actually go off and query that. And that's what the person who built this connector has done, is just created a function. It's called build URL, which takes in the ticker symbol, a start date, and an end date, and does some stuff to basically just build up that URL. All right? There's then another one which does a conversion of the dates into a string. All right, so dates tend to be formatted with slashes, and they don't work very well within a URL, so it's required that it's converted into a string that's a format that the API likes. And then we have the main bit, which is actually defining the connection, defining how to get the data. The column part couldn't be more simple. It has two variables. They are arrays, which we looked at earlier. One's called field names, and we're going to see it has the ticker, so the stock that we submitted, the day of the stock price, the closing value, and then also the volume in there. Each of these then has a related field type. So the ticker is a string, the day is a date, close is a float, and volume is an integer. There's also date time in the field types, and Boolean. I don't think there's anything else that I've missed off. Again, that's in the documentation. And then the bit that builds up the data table. And your end goal for building up the data table is to build up an array. And you can think of the array, the list, as each row within the data table. And then to define all the columns, we create an object. So remember back to the 101, the array was the shopping list. Okay? And the object was the casino that had various attributes against it. And as we go through the code, what we'll see is there's the date that's being pulled through, the connection URL, which is built from that function, which returns it in. Here's the AJAX call, which has a few inputs. One is the connection URL, One's, well, what type of data are we returning? JSON. And then what to do when that connection is successful and has downloaded all the data. And all the data that's downloaded is assigned to this variable data. And so that's what we then manipulate in order to build up the data table. And so it goes through, it's building up this variable called quotes. I've got an idea that quotes is probably an array, because in this for loop I can see that they've built it to loop through that quotes variable. And here is the definition of the columns within each of those rows. Okay? So the ticker, the day, the close, and the volume all relate to the field names up at the top here. And you can define these at any point. All right, so that entry is defined in the same sort of order. You can define them in different orders. The most important thing is that the name here must match the field name that you defined earlier. Each entry is pushed to the array, and then eventually we tell Tableau, right, we're all done, and we pass the data to Tableau to process and build a TDE. All right, so let's see this one in action. As I say, there's this simulator which is given in the SDK. All right, within the simulator, you can load the connector. In this case, I've loaded the stock quote connector final. And in the box here, we can see what the connector is going to look like. And to the left, we have the variables that we can assign to Tableau. So we've seen connection name, we've seen connection data. There are other things like you define the column which is going to be used for incremental refresh, just like you would in a normal TDE extract. A username and a password if there's some sort of authentication. And you can save that to the session within the data connector. So I'm going to type in Tableau's stock. Tell it to go get stock data, and we'll see at the bottom here it's built up the column names and the data types, and then the results that are returned. And so we can use this to try and make sure everything works and to test the connector. But really you want to know what's going on in the background. All right? Why did this connector work and what was it doing? So to the right here, I've brought up the sort of the developer tool within Google Chrome. The easiest way to get to it is a right-click and hit Inspect Element. Let me just blow it up here so you can see it at the back. There we go. And so we have all the HTML that's within the connector. We have a console which would give us any errors that have occurred in the code. So if something's not working as you expect, you'll get a big red error that turns up in the console there. And then the other bit that's kind of cool is the Network tab. And under the Network tab, it shows everything that's been loaded in the background that we kind of didn't see. So if we want to understand what this data looks like when it comes down through from the API, we can go in here. And let me see if I can size this a little better. There we go. And one of the nice things is that it presents JSON and XML in a way that we can navigate and understand in order to build up our connectors and to make them better. So this is what the API returned. It has the attribute query, which came down. It tells us that there are 252 records within that query when the query was done, and the results that were returned. And the results are a list of an array which has values all the way from 0 to 250, and within that is an object which has all of the information about this stock on that day. Now you can see that there's some stuff in here that isn't in the connector. Right? So we have things like adjusted close and high and low and open. Why don't we put some of that in and just give it a go and see if we understand the code that we were looking at. So let's take high. We can go into the code. We'll go at the top and we'll create a new field name. High. High was a float. So we can define that. And then we can go down into here, and we start to see things that were familiar from the API. So there's the data, index.query.results.quote that we saw here. Query, results, quote. Okay, so that's where it got the data from. The next thing that we want is to get the high value. We can go to the point in the array that the loop is at. So it starts at 0 and works its way through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 until it gets to the end. And we can reference that high value and assign it to the variable high. That II value there is an index that's being built up, which references where in the array you want to be. And it's going to increment 1, 2, 3, 4 as it goes through. And so we can sort of just reference which row we're on as it goes. We push the results back to the array and then back to Tableau. So let's save that. I have to pray to the internet gods again. Looks like the definition has worked there. So there's the high value, which is a float, and it's brought in the values there. Okay, so we have a connector that's worked, that we've tweaked, and then we see that the results are still coming through as expected. So how about let's see how that would work in Tableau. I'm going to grab the URL, create a new connection. Apologies at the back, I know this isn't zoomed very well. We'll do the same action, and then we find closed, volume, ticker and day, and then our new measure high, and then, it's Tableau, right? So it's everything we love. We just drag stuff out, start to play. And seriously, what happened there? I'd actually quite like to know. Yeah, not great. But that is how simple it can be. Taking something works, changing it, and then viewing the results. And learning as you're going, right? I think it's kind of important. Sometimes I've seen people try to learn these connectors, and I think one of the mistakes that can be made is you see that someone's created a Fitbit connector, and you go, okay, so I'll take that Fitbit connector. They've published the code, brilliant. And I'm going to now convert it to a Strava connector. And it just doesn't work. All right, you're actually doing a brand new connection. These two APIs will have completely different logic, completely different data. And the first thing you do when you're changing all the reference URLs is build a brand new connector. You no longer have a working connector which you're modifying. You have a brand new connector, basically. Okay, so it's a little sort of health warning if you want to try and get into this, is to just start with a working solid connector. Make some changes, learn the HTML part, learn the CSS part, do a bit of tweaking in the JavaScript, and keep going and checking your work as you go, because you need to know where you went wrong, right? So I'm not actually going to go here, because I think basically I have like one slide left. What I thought I'd do is kind of just show where I've got to in my journey with this. And so I started about, I think it was around March time. Was that when the beta was out? About then? Yeah. And I sort of wanted to start quite simple. And a website that's really easy to query is something called Quandle. And for anyone who doesn't know Quandle, it's this repository of various financial data and data from World Health Organization, all that stuff in one place, with a consistent API that you can query and get the data out from. Has no authentication or anything like that, so I thought, well, you know what, I'll try and connect to that and see what I can get out. That was back in March or April. And about 3-4 weeks ago, we launched this sort of new version of our connector site with, how many we've got now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 connectors from someone who doesn't code, right? I really don't. I'm not trying to be clever or anything. I do not code. I know how to Google. The beauty, and it's something I've only just sort of realized in the past few weeks, why I've been able to create 7 connectors fairly easily. Most of the time, like at the weekend when, in between sort of my daughter napping and trying to do dishes and stuff, is because Tableau took a lot of the work away from me, a lot of the difficulty. It's something that's amazing about this company for me. I had a life-changing moment with them sort of 4 years ago when I really properly discovered it, and I'm now on stage here. But they take so much complexity away in the software that we see when we connect to data, when we just drag it out and we see and start exploring data rather than battling with some software. But these guys managed to put all that simplicity into this SDK. I feel like SDK is sort of too complex a thing to call it. Just be like the JavaScript helper, right? And it's something that means that you can get into it. They've taken that complexity and they've just thrown it away. And so, we can be innovative. We can do what we do every day with Tableau and exploring data and just getting the data that we want now through something that's very generic and really easy to work with. Okay, now any questions? Yes? Yes. No, that's the... Not now. Yeah, one of the beauties of doing it this way is that it can refresh on its own. You can do it a normal refresh through just right-clicking on the connection and go and extract refresh. And it'll trigger all of the variables. It'll save those variables within the connection, and it'll reuse them again in order to get the data out and update it. The next stage, of course, is publishing to server and using the connector on server. And that is dead easy to do, just publish up. You can even use these connectors in Tableau Public. You can publish a workbook with a web data connector in it to Tableau Public. When it comes to refreshing, currently the security model that Tableau have is that the connector code has to be hosted on the Tableau server. So there is a method, a tab admin command, to import the code into the Tableau server, and then it's run from the Tableau server. And really the reason for that is JavaScript can have some funky stuff in there that could do some things to your machine. And so it's just putting a stage in where someone can check the code, make sure it's good, and then basically make a copy of it to the Tableau server. But yeah, once it's there, Tableau can refresh it. Yes? Yeah, well, it is. It's an extract. Sorry, the question was, if you publish the workbook and then you open it the next day, will it have the latest data, or do you have to schedule it? So it is an extracted connection, just like an extracted SQL connection. You do have to have set up some schedule in order for it to refresh. It's not a live connection to Fitbit or to Runkeeper or something. So you just handle it like you would any other extract. Yes? Okay, so the question was, are there any plans to kind of create a library of sort of approved connections so that you know one place to go to? I think we could coin a phrase there. It's not one version of the truth, it's one version of the data. Just sort of one place to go to be sure that they're all good connectors. I can't speak for Tableau. I believe there is an idea. Oh, yes. Okay. Can we turn this microphone on? Yep, I think good.
So there is on the developers.tableau.com, there's a link to WDC. There's Tableau WDC connectors that are out on GitHub. So there's already, I was just looking, there's already about 10 of them out there. And then there's also, we're starting to collect community-built ones. We don't yet have Tableau, quote, certified ones, but we are putting the ones that we're creating internally out on GitHub. So, and all the source code's out there, so you can see how we're building them internally as well. We'll have certified ones. There we go.
Cool. Yes. Can you repeat?
In the connector,
Yes.
you wrote a loop to go through each line.
So the question was, is sort of looping through the results kind of the most efficient way? Really, the goal is to build the array of objects. However you get to that goal is completely up to you. All right, so you could think of a connector as just sort of making one call to a URL, a single URL, pulling the data down and then parsing it out. The Fitbit connector connects to 8 different URLs simultaneously, builds them all the data up simultaneously, and then mashes it all together right at the end. So there are different ways, different methods. So if you're working with loads of data, you might use paging in order to just grab chunks, different pages, all together, and then build them up. I haven't sort of hit too much of a wall with the performance, though. And I believe some of the Tableau guys who are a bit more sort of wanting to push stuff have got up to like millions of rows, right?
I don't know about millions, but we've benchmarked it, and doing that aggregation within your connector tends to work better than doing the callback to Tableau Desktop.
Okay. Yes? Yeah.
Thank you. If I have a user interface, can I enter parameters into the user interface on the Tableau side so that it passes to the web connector? So in your example, when you enter your ticket for a specific share, you would go to separate window. Can you do it from like a drop down within the Tableau user interface?
Well, no, any configuration is always going to be done within that Web Data Connector box. There's no sort of quick way to do it within the Tableau desktop interface, unless these guys are now going to like reveal something that's kind of cool. No, we good? Okay, cool. Yeah. Thought I'd get something out of them. Yeah, it's all done within that connector interface box. I'm going to go with someone else and we'll come back. Yes. It depends how you want to configure it. Yeah, so if you're building a connector just for yourself, you'd probably just embed as much of the credentials as you can into your code without sort of saving your password. But yeah, I have a connector to the Alteryx gallery in order to like trigger workflows and to get fresh data down. And while I'm developing it, I embed the gallery URL and my API credentials just to make it quicker to use, to work with. And yeah, you can save it to the connection data variable and then reuse it again when the box loads. Yeah. And there was another one over here. You get one. Make it good.
Yeah. So 2 questions. First, is the connector only for REST-based APIs? And the second question is if you guys have any out-of-the-box integration with Auth 2.0 in terms of security.
Okay. So the first one, no, it's not just for REST APIs. Anything that JavaScript can handle, you can push through a web data connector. So Tableau have examples where you can just drag like XML straight onto the web data connector interface, and it'll parse it locally, and you can run with that. In terms of OpenAuth, definitely tread with care. There's a whole bunch. OpenAuth is possible, and Fitbit is now OpenAuth too. So it's very possible. In terms of developing, it's really tricky because you can't use the simulator. With it being an iframe, you can't forward on to do the authentication. You have to do it sort of all manually through a web browser while you're developing. But yeah, it's absolutely possible. And I do have a GitHub page. You search for the Information Lab on GitHub. We've got a few connectors that I've published. I'm trying to get them all up there when I get time. But there is one example. I think it's the Fitbit one. Has working code for OpenAuth. It's a great one to crack. I have like 3 sort of recipes. I think one of them is OpenAuth. And once you crack that, you can get loads of other ones.
We'll have a OAuth Quick Start Guide published very shortly.
Perfect. See what I mean? Just taking the complexity away. Any others? I'll come back. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So the best example for that one I could think is, if you give me 2 seconds, go here, and we have a connector for Mapbox's directions API, and in this one you just enter it. It's not the best way to do it, I don't think, but it kind of works. So we can type in like Las Vegas, and I don't know, give me something else, Seattle. Okay, we can say whether we're going to drive, walk, or cycle it. It's quite far. So let's see, we're driving. That makes a call to Mapbox's geocoding API, which looks at Las Vegas and Seattle and tries to geocode them and gives us various options to select. So Las Vegas, Nevada, and Seattle, Washington, they're good. And then we can keep going, and we can say, right, we're going to do it again and again and again and again to build up. And I'm waiting for you to fix that interface problem. There's a ticket submitted, don't worry. I think there's another question. Does that answer the question? And then, yeah, basically, so that's building a kind of complex set of parameters, which are then put into array and then submitted. Yeah. The only restriction is you have to stringify it. You make it a string first. You can't submit a raw array. Yes.
Hi. So the examples that you showed seem like pretty structured data sets already, and I'm wondering, the application I have in mind is pretty unstructured, like web page, and like converting it into a data set. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, everything's possible.
Awesome.
So it tends to be a way to handle the unknown, right? So, for instance, let's go to... So Quandle, although it does return as an API, it can return different types of data. It can be like a 3-column API, or it can be a 10-column API, and it doesn't tell you what the data types are. All right. So what happens in the background of this is, if I type in data, it goes off and gets the headers. Or it should do. Is this one broken? Oh, how interesting. Let's try and again. Oh, clearly I need to fix that one. Whoops. It had to happen. So that one goes off to the API, finds out what the data looks like, presents the headers to you, and allows you to select what the data types are. So that's kind of the most I could get out was the headers. And then I was allowed to then ask the user to select what the data types are because I couldn't detect them. If you're really doing sort of HTML parsing, I'd recommend either import.io or ParseHub. Both have connectors out there. One of them is here. And they basically allow you to look at a web page and say, right, this is the data I want to extract out. And this is how to iterate through it, and this is how to move to another page and do it, or even do the authentication, and it'll present it as an API. All right, so it can take a lot of the complexity away from you. Yes? Sorry, I just want to check on time. We're good. Got 5 minutes. So you can do the incremental refresh. So if in the connector someone defines like which column to look at for the incremental refresh, then yeah, absolutely. Doesn't have to refresh the whole TDE. Yes? It's the code to make server refresh, it does have to sit on the server. It's the current solution. I'd like to see it be a little bit nicer. so the code can be remote and do the security a different way. But yeah, that's where it is right now. Yes.
So I'm new to all of this, and I get like seeing other people's stuff, and so where do I start, right? Like, do I look up this presentation later, or what do I start with so that I can then start tweaking and create?
You start with the same way that anyone starts a Tableau. You have a question, right? The question will point you to the data that you need to get a hold of. The data is in a format that you can't just download, or it has an API, and that's where you go. The API will have documentation, hopefully, about what it's going to return and how to call it. Get a kind of general understanding of that, and then maybe within the examples find something that's kind of similar, so you can understand the stages that you need to do, and then apply that.
I guess that was my question: is where do I get those examples?
So the developer website.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Or just going on anyone else's connector within like Chrome and inspecting all the code behind it. Yeah, you can read, the Java code's not obfuscated or anything, you can read everything. Okay, one last question? Yes. Sure. So the question is that once it's published to the server, is there any kind of way to bring up that Web Data Connector configuration screen so that one person can maybe look at Tableau stock price and the other person look at Microsoft stock price? As of now, no. As of now, you kind of think of it as a Microsoft SQL connection where you define the table and the authentication and you publish that. You can't then edit the table that's going to be used within the standard browser. Maybe that's some feedback for these guys. Kind of cool. Okay, I think with that, we'll call it time. Thank you very much.
This is Dan.
Oh, what? As you leave, fill out the survey. I knew I'd forget that one. Go on the app and fill out the survey.